Hi, everybody. It's the last week of class, and we want to spend some time doing some reflections that will finish things out for us. I just wanted to share with you the three main goals that we have in the literacy MA program at UNC. This is something that a few years ago we as a faculty sat down and discussed the idea that we have these three central goals in putting together a program like this. And of course, we also have to address all of the state standards that go along with the reading teacher endorsement, but those are all encompassed in these kinds of goals. And this comes from all of our experience working with teachers over decades of time, and also working with students ourselves, working with field-based programs, and watching and participating in teacher development and so on. So I'm going to start with this one down here at the bottom. Best practices. This comes from our understanding from our own practice and from listening to you as students, that one of the main reasons people come to an MA literacy program is to improve their classroom practice and the experience that they and their students have during the school year. And that also, for us, includes a broad narrative of the research, so that it's not just something where you're looking for this little idea and that little idea, but you're putting that together under a larger narrative of how things work for a big topic idea like writing, like this course is about, or like something like new literacies, or something like assessment. So that best practices is one of the larger goals that we have inside of this program. And best practices as a term usually implies a review of the research and the ability to put that research into a broader narrative. And let me just give an example of that. There are programs out there that are designed clearly to give you and your students a way to write a perfect keyhole essay, that 5-paragraph essay. That's one little piece in the broad narrative about the research. And if it's research-based, you need to be able to find research studies that aren't written by the publishing company themselves that tell you that this is best practice. A broad narrative of the research is going to include the big picture instead of just that little narrow focus of writing the 5-part essay. And we've focused in this class a lot on the ideas of writing with purpose and writing for audience, which are two elusive aspects of learning to write in curriculum over the past 50 to 60 years. And so we've oriented ourselves towards trying to capture how teachers can get a broad narrative for curriculum in teaching writing. It includes these two things that have been perennially missing. Advocacy is the next item. We believe that if you're in a master's program, that part of what you're learning how to do is advocate for your students and for yourself. That you as a teacher in the profession, and you're advocating for yourself and your ability to teach, but also always on behalf of the students. So what's best for kids, what's best for teachers, and what have you learned about that by doing the research and assignments throughout this course? And one of our huge goals in you learning to advocate for yourself and students is that you don't get bulldozed by policy. That when policy comes up, that you're able to see that it's coming, you're able to see whether it's good for teachers and whether it's good for students. A lot of literacy policy that's come down over the past 30 years in the United States has not been good for teachers and not good for students either. Not good for students in a lot of ways because it hasn't been good for teachers, that the profession has suffered because of much of the policy, but also much of the policy does not include a broad enough narrative for what the research says for students. So best practice comes back into it again. Research on this side, this has to do a lot with assessment, which is to say that if you are wondering about how learning and teaching work, you're going to be inclined to collect the kind of data that will help you show that students are learning in your classroom, and to show that to others and be able to present that to others. So the research, inquiry and wonder, things that you are wondering as a professional about how learning and development works. So for this course in particular, our questions are about how do people actually learn to write? And this is a central question because oftentimes in a master's program in education, we focus so much on the teaching that we let the learning go. And from any kind of logical perspective, if we don't know how people are learning, we shouldn't be designing teaching until we understand how the learning actually works. And ultimately, if our students aren't learning, whatever we're doing, is it actually teaching? Again, I understand that there are various factors that come into how students show up for classes, how prepared they are, what their dispositions are, and so on. But we know a lot in this decade from the research on teaching, writing, and reading about how learning works best. The assignments for this week are largely reflections on those items. So think about the 7 to 8 weeks we've spent together thinking closely about writing, learning to write, teaching writing, and what you know about those things now. I've put together 2 assignments for you on that. One of them is a research, a set of citations from the research, where I'm just going to ask you to pick some of the best things that you've looked at in terms of research articles and books and so on throughout the semester, so that you can tell me how those are going to impact your professional development potentially, as well as being something that you can carry forward for your students. The other thing that I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to go through a list of standards that this course originally was designed to address. And some of those cross over from the writing standards over into the digital literacy standards. And what I want you to do is I want you to just read through those. And if you feel like you've made some strides in one or more of those standards, we want you to put in some evidence for that you think would show your growth. And you can categorize that. If it's something that you think, okay, I learned about this and it came through the readings and the discussions, then categorize that as just a knowledge development. But if there's something that has changed your practice and that you've actually applied it, then talk about it as application of knowledge. You know, that sort of Bloom's taxonomy. If you're applying and teaching something, that's a higher level of learning than something where you've just learned to discuss it or repeat it or pass a quiz on it or something like that. And somewhere in the middle is that ability to synthesize some of the information. So some of the assignments for this course have asked you to synthesize things and put them together and so on. Find the standards that you think that you have made professional growth in. If there are ones that you think, well, the evidence from this class doesn't really apply to some of these standards, then don't put something in those lines. So choose the ones where you think, okay, if I understand this standard correctly, I think I've made some growth in it. Here's the evidence, and here's my argument for what kind of knowledge I have of that standard now. It's going to be pretty limited that way this week. We're not going to do a lot else other than that because there's no additional reading. This is going to be in lieu of a final exam for the course. All right, we'll talk to you soon.